Welcome to Humanity Rising. I'm Tom Eddington. I'm delighted to be hosting a series this week on technologies of hope and creativity. This week, we'll be exploring the topic of creativity through a variety of lenses. And if we look at the world today, humanity is both witnessing and creating the collapse of our natural and human-made systems, including healthcare, financial services, education, food, agriculture, to name just a few. This collapse is a result of population growth, climate change, our level of human consciousness, and the reality that human-made systems have outlived their utility. It's time for us to hospice out these old systems, or probably we should have decades ago, and midwife in the new systems. Many of the new systems being created can be aided by technology. Hence the topic this week of technologies of hope. To support humanity during this tumultuous time of transition will require that each of us embrace creativity and resilience, probably the two most essential competencies we all need as human beings in the 21st century. So I welcome you to our conversation today on creativity. I'd like to invite my co-host and moderator, Dan McCann, to join us. Welcome, Dan.
Hello,
Great.
everyone. Thanks for that introduction, Tom. I'm equally excited about the content and the panelists that we have throughout this whole week today. Before we get into the incredible two guests joining us just in a few moments, I just want to mention that this is a 5-day series on creativity in the 21st century and technologies of hope. And how do those two things go together in a way that allows us to be more resilient and build a sustainable and hopeful future for all the challenges that we face? I think nowadays there's a lot of focus put on those challenges. And while we want to bring that awareness, we're really excited to bring you some optimism and some of the best thinkers about the future and about creativity to help us really understand what it is that we can do to build the future that we're most excited about for ourselves and for future generations. In a lot of ways, in today's fast-paced environment, marked by pretty incredible technological advancements, we're finding ourselves in a pivotal moment. The global landscape is rapidly evolving, presenting complex challenges and demanding innovative solutions to those challenges. Now, more than ever, creativity and resilience are not just valuable traits, but essential tools for our survival and our growth. So this series today and throughout the week explores how we can use these tools to lead us toward a hopeful and sustainable future. Today in particular, we're going to delve into the role of creativity in the 21st century, which is often seen as the domain of artists and musicians, and we'll have a few of those throughout the week. And it's often seen as artists and musicians, but in truth, a universal capacity that is crucial for innovation and problem solving across all sectors. A common theme you might hear through the week, through the panelists, through your moderators, Tom and I, is that we truly believe that each and every one of us is creative, and that not only that, creativity is a renewable resource. So today, with the guidance of Stanford professor Michael Ray, who is a scholar on the field and written countless articles, publications, and books on these topics, joined by the incredible musical talents of my friend Diana Ladio, who is a professional touring musician and violinist, we're going to explore how everyone can tap into their innate creativity, fostering it within themselves and their communities to navigate and shape the world around us. So without further ado, we'd love to invite both Michael Ray and Diana Ladio to join the broadcast. Just turn on your video and yay.
Hello.
Hi.
Welcome.
Diana, it would be great if you could start us off with a little bit of music.
Yes, I'd be happy to. Well, it's morning where I am in Nashville, and this is one of the pieces I like to play because it kind of eases into my day. It starts slow and progresses a little bit. So I'll be playing a 5-string fiddle, which has a low C string. So I'll start there, and I'd be happy to talk more about that if it becomes relevant.
Thank you, Diana. Would you like to share a few comments about what you just played?
Yeah, that was began as an improvisation. I have always believed strongly in kind of to aid instrumentalists in the mindfulness practice that can be associated with playing an instrument. And um, while many people, when they meditate, are focusing on their breath, or focusing on a part of their body, or maybe something in the room, we as instrumentalists have something in our hands, and specifically string players have something that vibrates, vibrates right next to us, and in the cells in our body. And so playing nice long bows to start the day often is, I find, very beneficial inside and outside of my musical practice. And so that one began as that and kind of developed into having a little bit more structure. But sometimes things still pop out in the middle of that piece that have decided to present themselves that day that hadn't happened before, and I try to leave myself open to it. But
Wow, how cool. So that a piece of music, a piece of art you just shared with us started as a personal sort of meditative piece, like some people might use an affirmation or might have another morning ritual, and then you've built it up into something that you shared with the outside world.
exactly that. And I suppose if you think about it, which ties in our topic for today, all music, all compositions really do begin as improvisations, whether it's with your hands on your instrument or whether it's something that you hear in your head. And I tell my students that too. It's a skill that so many of us, it becomes pretty life-changing as instrumentalists when we become comfortable with that, because being able to play without prior knowledge based on something that you've cultivated or created within yourself is pretty life-changing. It allows you to play with lots of different people, being comfortable making something up, but it also really truly changes your relationship with your instrument. When I obviously come from the classical strings world, and we are taught that we're taught to play what we're told to play, and then we wait until someone else tells us when it's correct. And so our relationship with our instrument is often of fear and with lots of other voices in the mix. And when you learn to improvise and be creative with just you and your instrument without any other voices in the mix, it really changes your whole relationship with music. And it certainly was transformative for me and led to a career playing a lot more than what I learned off the page in my orchestral days, which again,
Wow.
don't discredit. I really do love orchestral playing, and I wouldn't have gotten a degree in it if I didn't. But it's just a wonderful way to learn the skills that then send you down many different paths.
Wow. Thank you for kicking off today's show and the whole week with that incredible music and soundbite. More on those threads later, because lots of juicy ideas that I think are stirring for Tom and I. I just want to say, for me, that music was very soulful, and I just love how that can speak to different parts deep inside. And Michael, I'd love to invite you into the conversation, and maybe you want to comment on what the music brought up for you, and then we'll delve a little bit into your incredible background as a scholar and a thought leader in creativity.
I think it was both really meditative and also stimulating, which is very interesting to me. You know, it just brought me into a space, and which is, I guess, what all great music does. You know, and there's really nothing like it. I mean, I worked with a woman, a person named Rochelle Myers, who was a cellist and played in orchestras in New York and everything. And then she became an artist, and her art is in books with Picasso and people like that. And then she became kind of an art therapist, but she wrote the first book that we did, Creativity in Business, with me. And so she just had this wide-ranging thing, but she always said that the main thing was making her life itself a work of art. And so that your music just brought me to the idea of what you were saying, Dan, that everybody is creative, and that just resonated with me. So thank you a lot.
Oh, I'm so glad. I can't wait to talk more about that. Thanks.
Well, Michael, let me start with you. So when we think about creativity, I mean, ultimately, the creator, God, created the universe, created the world from a biblical and from a religious context. And then throughout history, we've had a whole host of people who have been seen as creative, whether we're talking about in the sciences, Isaac Newton, or in the mass media, Walt Disney, Steve Jobs, Marie Curie, Leonardo da Vinci, Thomas Edison, and one of my all-time favorites, Albert Einstein, who said creativity is intelligence having fun. And so I'd love to just have you kick off this conversation on the work you've done at Stanford in the MBA program and the books you've written and how you think about creativity.
Okay. Well, this has been a long journey for me, and I would say I've been toying around with this for almost 60 years. And that's just a benefit of being old. So it's really the aspect of that. But I think that that just kind of talking about my process, and we'll bring in a lot of different things. So I was very successful in at Stanford and in doing everything. I had tenure, which allowed me to do some things that other people might not do. And but I really thought there was something more to this, and I really drew on the things that I looked at in terms of creativity itself. And I went through a series of processes, and I just want to say a little bit about some of those things. I began to get a little bit into sort of spiritual pursuits and meditation and things like that. And I'm mentioning these things not in terms of recommendation, although I would in terms of more discussion. But the first thing I did was I got into something called the Hoffman process. And there are all kinds of things like this, but it's a very successful thing. And just to give you an idea of what their approach this is that they have this idea of negative love. And so it goes very, very deeply into things. And negative love is the idea that we're all born creative and everything else, but we have this, and that we want love. That's our idea. First thing, we want love. And at the same time, we don't get it. We expect that coming out, and we don't get it. And we're searching for it and searching for it. And we try everything we can. And finally, we decide, well, we're going to copy the things that our parents do. Our parents can't really give the thing that we're looking for because they haven't got it in the past. And so the idea is that we sort of pick up these negative traits. The idea that from our parents in order to get love. So we say, I see that you're kind of violent and abusing daddy. I'll be like that too. Now will you love me? And so you get all these characteristics. And I don't want to stay on that, but the idea there is that we have these negative characteristics and then these fabulous positive characteristics. And by working through these things in this particular program, you get at those things. And then I got into a situation where I got into a spiritual practice. And the main thing about that I think is important is that I had what's called Shaktipat or Kundalini awakening and so on. And that kind of situation puts you into a situation where you begin to realize your divinity, the highest aspect of what you're doing. And in a program, series of programs I did for the Conscious Leadership Guild, I found that many people had this kind of awakening, just like a Kundalini awakening. Didn't have to be that, some of them were, but you sort of realize your divinity, you realized who you could be, and then after that, it was a process of working with that and bringing that out. Then throughout my career, I kept bringing creativity into courses. There'd be marketing courses, advertising courses, and so on. And I found that those courses, those sessions that I would have would be the most powerful thing I could do. They could last for days and so on because people were so fascinated by it. And then we did a course called Creativity in Business. And in that course, the basic idea of it was, what I would say to the students is that what we're doing in this course is related to the highest experiences that you had in your life. looking in the face of a newborn baby. When you hit a perfect golf or tennis shot, or you just say the right thing in a meeting to a friend, or you get this rush of energy and peace when you execute a series of perfect dance steps, get absorbed in a sunset, the experience of awe, experience love for someone, and feel at one with water while you're swimming. It's what Mihaly called flow. And this experience of flow, of being in the situation where nothing else matters except what you're doing, and you start doing something and you realize, hours have gone by and it doesn't really matter. Time doesn't matter. Support and getting awards or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's just this thing. It's all internal. Bill Russell wrote this book, his autobiography, the great Celtic basketball star. And he would say he would be in games where he could be spitting up blood, and he didn't care who won or lost the game, but he found himself in the right position at the right time, no matter what. It's that kind of thing. And so what I would say to the students is the purpose of this course is to have that experience all the time. And so, and of course, you can't have it all the time, but pursuing that, you're mentioning God, Tom, and it's sort of, in my book, The Highest Goal, we talked about, we're really talking about having an experience of enlightenment. So that's the highest goal. And, you don't get it all the time, but the pursuit of it, the journey of it is really important. So the course had these aspects of it where we're saying that the goal of it is answering two questions: who is myself, and what is my work? Those two aspects. And in order to get to that, we used an approach called Livewitz, in which we would give people a sort of heuristic for living, and they work with that for a week and just have that experience. So they would be Livewitz like, if at first you don't succeed, surrender, ask dumb questions, be in the world with and not of it, be ordinary. And each of these related to different aspects of tools that would bring up creativity and issues in life, like finding what your purpose in life is and what your work is, and dealing with time and stress, and how to achieve balance, and being yourself in the world, and being in the world and not of it. And so this related to a lot of application. We did work with people who were affected by 9/11, and had a group of people do a special version of that course. This was used in Afghanistan, to work with women in Afghanistan. This is used in a lot of environmental projects. And so it keeps going now. There are people doing this. I want to mention one other thing, which we might bring up later, but there is a technology that's being developed called the Inner Development Goals. And maybe I can talk a little bit about that later, but it's a very important technology, I think, that's being used to deal with the environment.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And just picking up on a couple of threads that you shared. So you mentioned the Hoffman process. And Dan is CEO of Risio Institute, and Risio does a lot of the similar work to the Hoffman process,
Right.
where people can have those same sorts of breakthroughs. And so I wanted to throw that into the mix. But separately, Diane, I wanted to bring you into the conversation a bit, specifically when we think about certainly when I think about creativity and artists, whether it's musicians or fine artists, we often have the assumption that the artist is working with a muse. And when I think about creativity, and if it's divinely driven or guided, we as the artist are the conduit for it. But there's oftentimes there's a muse, there's another person that will somehow help spark that creative process. And I'm wondering for you, if you have a muse, or if you've had muses throughout your life who've helped with that creative process for your musical work.
Sure. I love that question because that is a topic that comes up often even within the creative community, is where's your source of information, inspiration? Where does it come from? What prompts you to create? And sometimes it's people, obviously. That's our relationships in life are some of the things we think about and feel most about. I am a spiritual person and the outdoors, and what has been, go ahead, Dan.
I just saw in the comments that some people are having it hard to hear you, and I wouldn't want to miss a word of this. So if you could adjust your speaking settings from the beautiful music, and then we'll pick it right back up from where you were, because this is juicy and we can't miss a word.
Is this better? I forgot to turn the setting off for the music.
Let us know in the chat if she's sounding great to you. It sounds good to me, Diana. So I'd love to hear where you were going on the topic of muses and creative sources of inspiration.
Yeah, so I mentioned that often it's people, because I think our relationships are one of the most important things in our lives, and often are the source of a lot of our emotion and what we think about day to day. Especially because love and heartbreak are what songwriters love to focus on, because that's just that's what pulls up so much for us. That's where we feel things so deeply. I personally am an outdoor enthusiast, and being out in nature and finding inspiration in the beauty that has been created around us, totally outside of our control, I find that to be pretty powerful. So often that is a source of my inspiration. But in general, I think, as you mentioned, Tom, often it feels like it's outside of us. That I think it's a pretty shared experience in the creative community. I talk with quite a few other people about this, is you often do feel like you didn't have anything to do with it, and that you were a vessel, maybe more than you were the source of the ideas or the musical passage. And I'm a writer as well, and I for that being to be using words is something that is less organic than sounds and music. But I do find that it happens the same way, that I'm often just making myself available and allowing the ideas to kind of like flow through. And I like the idea of being a vessel, or being a kind of a transport. And the difficult part about that is if you are spending your days married to your lists, which is often the case for me as someone with my hands in so many different projects, or have every moment scheduled, or are finding yourself in flurries of stress, which is also a part of my life as a traveling artist. We close the door to that. We're not available to that. And so I find that the most powerful and the most productive thing I can do for my creative process is to carve time to make myself available to that. And that is very, very intentional. And I'd love to think that it moves you and hits you at all times throughout the day, which it does do sometimes. But for the most part, I think that it has to be a really intentional process to create the ability to go into that state of flow that Michael mentioned, because that is not only is it powerful and incredibly productive, and you create just you find yourself just cultivating so many fun things at once. It's very pleasurable. Going in that singular, I call it going singular. When you're where your brain is, it's almost meditative, is so focused on one thing and able to just be able to, in my mind, create that passageway between whatever is inspiring you and then bringing it into fruition. And I guess in my mind, that's what creativity is. It's creating something that didn't exist before, and whether it's coming from you intellectually or whether you believe that it's something that you are receiving and then bringing into fruition from somewhere else, from somewhere higher. But it is an intentional process to create the right headspace and time in life to be able to make that happen. So even if you are, I journal constantly about relationships and friendships and everything going on in life, but to then take that and bring it into some type of actual creative product, that takes and that's an intentional process. It takes time and energy.
I'd love to follow up and take that a little bit deeper and ask you both, starting with Diana, on this idea of an intentional process. You know, we have heard you just say, Diana, and lots of artists say that, you know, I almost feel guilty because I didn't do it. It came through me. And so when you think about that intentional process, and I know we have a lot of artists and people in the chat that probably would love some tips from the both of you of how you can tap into flow and what kind of practices that you bring into your day-to-day life. You know, Tom also mentioned Risio Institute, which Tom, Diana, and I all in different ways have engaged with over the years. And we have a new program called Embodied Creativity that is really around how do you understand your creative process and how do you then reliably return to it. And Diana has been an incredible contributor to this, and you've told me about your rapid fire gratitude in cold water. So I just would love to hear from both of you about what your creative process looks like and how can the folks listening tap into their flow and their creativity more regularly.
Sure. I'm happy to start, but I'm really curious to hear what Michael has to say too, having studied this so closely. From a personal perspective, as I mentioned, I think making it as much a priority, just time. And I know that, you know, people say over the years that progress comes from consistency. You know, a lot of times in the music world, we say you just have to show up. You just have to put your instrument in your hands and make sure you budget the time. And you might say, I'm going to play for 10 minutes with no goal in mind. And you usually end up playing for at least an hour. But for me, because I do so many different things on the regular basis and travel quite a bit, I have a pretty detailed map of what my week looks like, and it's color coded, and this is my writing time, and this is my time with friends, and this is practice time. But there's a whole block on the calendar that is cleared the decks and dedicated towards an expanse of time that I'm dedicating to just being available to whatever needs to be written or played that week. And because as musicians, we're expected to keep producing new material, and part of our jobs is to stay current and be releasing music. And with that comes the expectation to be creative and bring something that is supposed to be equally good or better to what you've released last to the table. And it does require knowing how to get yourself into that creative place that you'd like to think just happens organically. But it has taken me a lot of time to figure out how to deliberately get myself into that headspace, which is not easy to do because any type of distraction or physical pain, or it's the things that may stand in your way from finding a flow when you're meditating, you have to do what you can to take the rest of your world outside of wherever your creative space is to be able to be almost in a vacuum so that you really can be receptive to whatever ideas come your way. And so in the broadest sense, staying healthy and my cold shower routine. I know it's a hot thing right now. I will say I've been doing it for way longer than it's been cool. But honestly, there are certain things that I know I find fasting really helpful. There are just certain things that I find obstruct my creativity, and removing those, even if it's silencing your phone and drawing the curtains and putting yourself in a place of quietness. And I have to keep things very visually quiet as well. That aids my creativity a lot. Just kind of blank spaces. My music room is as decluttered as possible for that reason. And yeah, I would say more than anything, the belief that we all are creative, which I'm sure we'll come back to, and doing what you can to remove the self-doubt piece, and just trusting that by showing up and creating the space and eliminating as many distractions as you can, you're giving yourself the best chance at finding some type of creative flow.
Michael, can you pick up on that and just share a bit more about whether it's your personal or the work you taught for years on helping people find their creativity and expressing it?
Yeah, I would say what she said, but I'll go on from there. But no, because Diana, you just touched on so many different things. I think one thing I would say about this is that the creative act and being creative is, in terms of that act, is kind of like crystallization. You know, behind it, it's just to create a crystal, you have to have the perfect humidity and pressure and heat or whatever it is, and then suddenly a crystal appears. And that's kind of what we're doing. And I can remember an example of my process in terms of this is that I have more time to do these things, but it really is that kind of thing. I get sort of the pressure and everything else because there are a lot of different things I want to do, and I get interested in a lot of things. And I remember one situation I had where I had a book contract for a long time. It was for a textbook, and by the time and over the years, I got, they give you a third of what you're supposed to get for it, and then they give you another third when you get a certain point, and when you're finished you get the last third. And somehow I tricked these people into giving me almost all of it. And but I wasn't interested in the topic anymore. I wasn't interested in doing this textbook. And suddenly the publisher got a new editor who was looking through things and so on. He said, well, where's this book? And so on. So I had just a few months to do that, and I just had this meditative experience. I guess it was dreaming, but I think it was a real experience. And I went to in this experience, I went to have darshan with my teacher, my guru, and I said, I have this thing going on. I don't know. I don't really want to do it. I don't want to, do this, but I have to do it. I'm going to have to go into topics that I've let go years ago and everything else. And he said, just spend 3 hours a day. I'd finish my book in 22 days, So the next day I sat down and set the clock to three hours. And suddenly I got this new concept of the book that I could write this textbook from the concept from the place where I was. But now I was into creativity. I was doing all these sorts of things, and this was going back into marketing and so on, which I wasn't that interested in terms of that particular aspect. And I finished the book in about three months. Way before anybody's expectations, including my own. And so that's kind of I think to bolster what Diana's saying, that it's just sitting down and doing it and having time to do it. And I think the idea that you mentioned, Diana, just sitting down and say, I'm just going to do this for 15 minutes. It doesn't have to be the 3-hour thing. And then suddenly the 15 minutes go a little farther and everything. And that's my experience. And then you can get into flow. a lot of it for me is having time between 3 and 5 in the morning, when nothing is going on, and suddenly there's this magic time where things happen. But all of this is about getting ideas and so on. And I think the bigger thing is as I said before, making your life a work of art. And so for a lot of people, we're not producing music or producing art or making discoveries in physics and all the people you mentioned, Tom. But I think that goal is something that's bigger than getting ideas, and I think it's the basis of everything we're doing. And so for me, that's been the thing that's carried me forward through all these 60 so years that I've been interested in this.
Wow. I love that. Make your life a work of art. And maybe I would be curious to see if the group here could tease out some examples of how to make your life more artful. If for those, especially for those that may not consider themselves a traditional artist. I know in your book, I think you've written several, but your book, The Creative Spirit, Michael, you talk about a specific idea that creativity is a vital part of human nature, and that it can be cultivated and expressed in pretty much every aspect of life. So you also wrote a book, The Highest Goal, which really talks about humans aligning their actions with their highest goal to unlock an endless source of creativity and resilience. So it's just such a privilege to have an academic and a real artist that just shares some music with us. What about everybody else? How do we help people live a life that is more artful? I'd love to start with you, Michael, and then we'll pass it to Diana. What are examples of ways in which people can bring this into their day to day, for example?
Well, I think going back to making your life a work of art, I think, and you're mentioning both of those books, The Creative Spirit and The Highest Goal, are sort of representative of this. I'll start kind of boldly with The Highest Goal. And the highest goal to me, I mean, in all these things, I have to talk about it so that it's not seen as being religious or something like that, but really you could call it, the highest goal is really enlightenment, and being in touch with God, if you want to use that term, or some people call source, and everything else. And so it's that that life is sadhana, is doing work. It's a Sanskrit term, but is doing what you're doing for that purpose. And so if you have that highest goal, then all these other things that might cause you upset or something like that are sort of transcended. And I'll just stop there. We can go back to it later.
Diana, I saw you write a note there, something that Michael said,
Yeah.
art's an idea.
Well, I've been writing notes about what Michael's been saying the whole time because I'm enjoying being a witness to this as much as a panelist. I just wrote down the word source because that sent a jolt. That is maybe a word that I've been missing when I talk about finding the state of flow, and often I'm weaving back a little bit through a couple different questions here and where my brain has gone based on some of what was just said, but the idea of making yourself available to the source, I'm just thinking of the times that I've sat down with my instrument and started playing something and nothing really comes about, or I'm playing what I think is a passage that's almost done, and then something shifts slightly. One note is a half step in either direction, and it's very physical, which could bring in the embodiment piece, Dan. But you know when you have when you have locked in on the idea that was meant to be a part of whatever you're doing or whatever you're creating. And it's such, it's physical. I'm usually moved to tears, and then I'm so grateful that having spent the time and made myself available to it, it finally has presented itself. It's finally come out, and it's an unmistakable feeling. And I've talked with other creatives about it. When you go, okay, we got there, we landed it, we opened the right door and allowed it to pass through. And so source will be a new word I'm using. Thank you for that. And then I had a couple other thoughts based on what Michael said about day-to-day cultivating. And I had written a blog post about this and was just reviewing some of those ideas, because I think in addition to making yourself available to it and learning how to put yourself in that headspace and remove environmental distractions and things like that, I think we also have to have systems in place to be available to ideas when they decide to strike us and it's not necessarily convenient, which is often for me. There's a famous Tom Waits quote. I'm going to paraphrase it, but when he's driving and he looks up to the sky and realizes that one of his hits has just dawned on him, and he looks up and he goes, "Don't you see that I'm driving?" And like, please, not now. I was just in the studio for 4 hours and now you decide to hit me. And so I use, just at a very logistical level, I use a note-taking app that anytime I have like a phrase or an idea or a theme or a concept for a new blog post, I'm just jotting notes constantly, and they're color-coded. You can see that with a brain that darts around color-coding and having a detailed kind of, I had to develop an A-type side of my brain just to be able to keep all of this in line and organized. But all of us musicians will have countless voice memos on our phone, where we have come up with a melody or even something, a rhythmic pattern, and you find yourself just singing into your phone, and it might be 3 or 4 in the morning, because then you can revisit it. And so you might have all of this time budgeted for some type of creativity, but if you have little pieces that have dawned on you over the course of the week, you have a place to start when you finally have the time to sit and budget the time to be creative. And I always have a journal handy, try to have an instrument available. I find that making music, I have a composition software, so if I'm at the airport or on a plane and I can't pull out my instrument, I do have the ability to make music, just from a more technological side, which may also be relevant. Yeah, but in terms of cultivating a more creative life, I'd happily link to that blog post, because it's just very, just at a very logistical level, things you can do day to day. So I'll put that in the chat. I think the number one thing that I see be pretty transformative for people is just acknowledging and trusting that they are creative. And creativity exists in so many places that we don't recognize it, whether it's problem solving or even just figuring out how to structure your day in a way that everything's going to get done. There are just so many times that you're cultivating ideas that you're having to create yourself. And we peg musicians and artists and authors as being the creative people in our society. And I think really believing and trusting that you are a creative person can just pivot the way that you approach life, and trust yourself to come up with the ideas. And then how we spend our minutes is how we spend our days, is how we spend our lives. And we can create a really beautiful work of art over a lifetime just with small decisions day to day. I know that that's a little vague, but hopefully it lands somewhere.
I thought it was very artful. I love how you twisted that together there. So thank you. Really beautiful. And I'm seeing in the chat, people would love the link, so we can grab that and put it in there before we finish. Tom, where would you like to take us? Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on something that Michael and Diana both were speaking to. And for me, when I think about my own creative process, and it doesn't matter what I'm creating, I'll set an intention that, all right, I'm going to, whether it's writing a book or working on a film or writing a report, it doesn't matter. I'll set an intention that this is something that I'm going to do without having a clear sense of form or where it's going to go, but I'll just set the intention that I'm going to do something. And for me, it's like I'm creating an energetic container that is an invitation to the universe to say, all right, this is what I'm going to, I'm intending to do. And that energetic container gets created, and then call it source, call it whatever you want, has the opportunity to bring in information into that container that provides that inspiration, that creativity. But something that you mentioned earlier, Diana, I hadn't really thought about was you talked about fasting. And for me, I did a 5-week fast a few years ago. And what I found was that in the first couple of weeks, it was working on my physical body and just clearing stuff out of the way, where my body became more of like a tuning fork for life. And then the next couple of weeks after that were very much moving from the physical body to the psychological, emotional body, and clearing that stuff out of the way, that allowed that container of intentionality and creativity to be more aligned with source, to allow stuff to come through. And it was an opportunity to really focus on that being the artist of my life. And I'm just picking up on the threads of what you and Michael were speaking to. I'm wondering how that lands for the two of you.
Well, I'm kind of slow, so I'll go back to the example that Diana gave of Tom Waits. I know in that situation where he was driving and couldn't accept what the muse was giving him, one of the things he said was, "Why don't you go to Leonard Cohen? Give him the idea. I'm too busy right now." And so I think that sort of opportunistic thing is setting up the possibility. And it could be with fasting, it could be with anything, but you got to think the possibility that could happen. The other thing that I think is interesting is that we started the book Creativity in Business by saying that this isn't about getting ideas. What it is about, I'll say it again, living your life as a work of art. And in the highest goal, the idea that we're living the purpose of our existence. Actually, we talk about who we are at core and the distinctive aspects that we have. We can talk about our work in the world in terms of what we're supposed to be doing. Some people feel that we make a contract when we come into the world for this lifetime, and we've got to work out that contract before we die. Remember, there was a cartoon I saw with this little guy sitting in an office with these piles of paper and everything, and so he just perplexed and everything. He said that they say that you have a certain amount of work to do in the world, and that you can see by the papers here and everything that I have so much work to do that I'll never die. And so it's that kind of thing. So, but I really want to say that given that we also have to work with people, and where does creativity come up in working with your collaborators, Diana, and people who are working in business and trying to deal with the environmental crisis and everything else. And that's a work of art in itself, in terms of how you work with collaborators to get anything done. I just might mention, I want to go back to what you're talking about, Tom, but there's this initiative, the Inner Development Goals, which I'll just mention, but this is very interesting. You know, the UN has had these sustainable development goals for a long time, since 2015. And just like everything in terms of the climate disaster, not much has happened during that period. So a group of people got together to develop this idea of sustainable development goals. And it's got pretty big. There are 500 IDG, Inner Development Goal hubs around the world in 80 countries. There are people doing this in 11 or 12 countries in terms of their training and everything else. And they have these 5 things that are sort of moving through, called goals, basic goals, and then other skills underneath that. Being, thinking, relating, collaborating, and acting. So I just want to mention, I could say more about it, but it brings us into the area of how you work with other people as a creative act.
Wow, yeah, absolutely. That is completely aligned with an area that I wanted to kind of ask you both about. Michael, as a career teacher, this is a really ripe topic, and you may not know, and people may not know, but Diana has had a number of projects teaching youth creativity and music. So I'd love to ask you both, as Michael so poignantly brought forth that topic, looking forward, what challenges and opportunities do you foresee in shaping and nurturing creativity among the younger generations? Diana, why don't we start with you?
Sure, happily. I'm just jotting some notes because that sent me down a very similar path, Dan, and then you just like took up the oar and did a nice big row with that. Thank you. Um, yeah, the co-creating piece is a pivot into a whole different world that is a skill in its own that I feel like is so important. And in Nashville, moving here, I would hear people talk about coming from a write, or they had a write, or they had a 4-hour write, and I had no idea what they were talking about. And now I understand that a write is a co-creating space where 2 people, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, usually 2, sit in a room, and their goal is by the end of 4 or 5 hours to have a hit song. and,
Cool.
and that's exactly where all of your hit songs come from. They come from a collaborative process, and they'll kind of grow and change in the production phases. But for the most part, I would bet that the majority of the songs that we know and love, especially, this is a country town where it's a particular style, but they're written relatively quickly because people are professionals at honing this creative co-creating process. That is what they have been trained to do, and it's not spontaneous. It is something that requires a certain skill set that you develop over years. But for being a musician, I'm very visual. But so when I think about being in a write with somebody, I think of both of us trying to channel our sources and then just putting it into this pool in front of us and tossing ideas around. But then not only that, but then the next step is going through and sifting through the ideas and deciding which ones are viable. And it's an interesting balance between feeling comfortable providing all of these ideas and having to have a certain amount of self-assuredness to actually vocalize some of the things you're thinking. And it's brave, which I'll come back to in terms of working with students. Like it is a leap of faith even to just present an idea to a co-writer. It's vulnerable. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for. But then, so you need the bravery to be vulnerable, but then you also have to put your ego aside when your idea doesn't necessarily come to fruition, or it's not necessarily the best. And so to be receptive to others' ideas at the same time, and it's a really beautiful cycle that, when done well, being able to witness it is pretty amazing. And then you can see why such a beautiful song can come from 4 hours. And last thought on that too is that many different artists in a co-writing scenario will insist on a blank environment, or they will insist on a particular type of coffee or a particular type of day when they know that they can work the best. As you mentioned, Tom, that I find that first thing in the morning, I'm lucky that this was morning for Nashville, because when I'm a tiny bit of caffeine on an empty stomach and a lot of water is where I can reach my creative flow most easily. It's what I've learned. Or as Michael mentioned, 3 or 4 in the morning, when I like to think about the rest of the world, like the bandwidth is just cleared. When the rest of the world is sleeping, you're not distracted. The space in the world is free to be able to cultivate. So the bravery piece, the vulnerability piece that comes from creativity, I think is probably the biggest roadblock when it comes to, especially non-creative people, learning that creative side of themselves, which is there for every single one of us. It's there. It's just recognizing it and then really trusting that it's there. And the way that this presents itself most in my teaching life is in the form of improvisation. Because as I mentioned at the very start, bringing it back around, that in the classical world it used to be a huge part of the classical tradition. Bach was our master improviser. He would use the same chord shapes, the same series of chords to write 6 different movements in one suite, and he did it through improvisation at the start, and it's just masterful work. But then we started, when the compositions came about, we got to the point of relearning those and learning them and playing them in their exact form, and the improvisation piece was kind of removed from that. And it wasn't really until traditional music, when you can trace it back so many different places, but one of the key changes in the US was ragtime and the saloons. They were playing for hours and hours at a time, so they just started making things up instead of playing exactly as the piece said to be played, which it makes total sense. It's where music serves us for dance and for socializing and for just general enjoyment. So now just about every genre of music, aside from classical music, employs improvisation. And I'm thinking specifically bluegrass and jazz and blues are built around the idea of soloing. And by soloing, we mean taking the chord structure, the form of the song, and using those notes to make something up, to create your own ideas, to say what you need to say. And like I said, all composition starts with improvisation, but improvising live in front of other people is incredibly difficult. It's difficult enough in your own space, but when you add any type of audience, it's a level of vulnerability that a lot of people don't really have to encounter day to day. And specifically classical players who, as I said, have a relationship with their instrument that's largely based on other people's voices. And you're striving in your hours and hours in the practice room to receive positive feedback from somebody else who in many ways is making the decisions based on experience about whether you've played that correctly or is offering feedback or what needs to be changed. And so improvisation takes away all of that. And when we spend our entire musical careers with rules and waiting to be told when something is right, making our own decisions is terrifying. And the sooner that we can introduce that, and this is kind of what I've built my life around, the sooner we can introduce that and build that skill, what is very organic, taking an instrument that makes sounds and creating your own sounds with it, the earlier we can introduce that, the easier it becomes going forward. And so the difference between asking 6th graders to improvise and 12th graders to improvise is night and day. You'll have a room full of 6th graders fighting to be able to be the ones to volunteer to play for the room. And high schoolers will sit there like statues. They cannot even imagine. So my process of introducing it involves using lots of rules at the start and then slowly taking them away so they're being asked to make more decisions on their own. But all to say that being creative is a very vulnerable and can be very scary process for many people, because it's offering an idea into the world that didn't exist before, that's totally on account of you, and you don't know how it's going to be responded to, and it's easy to feel silly or trite, like you're not necessarily qualified to be creating these ideas. And I am here to tell you that you are not silly, and it is scary, and I'm validating that, but also that it really can be pretty life-changing, music and otherwise. Get very passionate about that topic, as you can hear.
Absolutely. I loved so many of the things you touched on, and at the end there, comparing the different ages. I've heard different people describe that the most creative people are actually being childlike. And what they mean is that they're able to play with ideas. They're able to explore them and kind of get out of their own way, not for any immediate practical reason, but for pure enjoyment or for its own sake. And I love that you brought that forth in the way in which you've engaged with a wide spectrum of backgrounds and ages. Michael, what was coming up for you there?
Well, I think the idea of one thing that came to mind, which is not really related to what I want to say right now, is just the importance of failure. Because and I see that one of the areas that I'm interested in is movies and how they're made and everything else. It's one of my passions, and you very often find that in that process, and I'm sure it's true in what you do, Diane, that it's failures are the things that lead to the greatest things in the process. I wanted to talk about the lifetime thing that you talked about, because there is this idea that we're at our most creative time, as you're saying, fairly young, like 5 or 6 years old, and we have all this going on there, and then society takes over, the teachers take over, and everything else. And by the time you get to, as you're saying, get to high school and so on, all that is sort of wiped away with all these restrictions and everything else. And so I'm sort of interested in how creativity operates, not for making art or anything like that, but just how it operates through a lifetime. And Rochelle Myers used to talk about Beethoven, and it's really a nice example of that. So that and the principle that when we start out in any endeavor like this, we sort of copy what's there before. And so Beethoven's early music sounded just like Mozart. It was just like he was doing that sort of thing. And I find when I look at creativity that in all these fields, movies, everything else, in terms of leading a life, we're copying from, as I was saying before, with the Hoffman process, from our parents, things like that, things that work there. And then, Beethoven went through these things where he did the symphony, the Ninth Symphony, and everything else. And Rochelle would talk about it in terms of the late quartets. He got to this point where he was doing something that's never been done before and never will be done again with the late quartets. They're just incredible and so on. So it's a span of the lifetime from, in the first place, it's kind of copying what's there. And you can talk about artists now, where they're getting their start from what happened before. But I think this is more general. Not just people who are in the arts, but people who are just living a life and again making a life a work of art. I hate to keep bringing that up again, but it's that process throughout our life, and we have to start from some roots and go from there, and hopefully we don't copy bad examples, but I just have faith that if we keep at it, it'll prove itself.
Yeah, picking up on that, Michael, and this theme of art is life. If we go back to the 1800s, the vast majority of the people on the planet were living in an agrarian environment. They lived on the land, they grew their own food, and then this last century, we saw a significant portion of humanity move to urban settings and working. And this story was created of what does it mean to be human? How do you spend your life? You get educated, you go to work, and then you retire, and then you die. And as we go into, we're a quarter of the way or nearly a quarter way into this new century, where that old model of the last century is no longer relevant. And some of the ideas we introduced at the beginning of this program, resiliency and creativity are two of the most important competencies to be human in this century. And we are not only being invited to, but being forced to be the artist of our life. How we spend our time, how we make money, what we put our values on, what our beliefs are. And it's a fascinating and scary time to be human. And so it does require us and invites us to be the artist of our life and to explore that in a fundamentally different way than has ever existed in human history. And I love this conversation around the creative process and collaboration and inspiration and finding our muse to invite our audience and each of us to really think about how do we be the artist of our life. And it does require that intentionality to take the space and the time to say, all right, so I am the artist of my life. What do I do with that?
Mm, yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing us sort of full circle, Tom. I think that that we've had a beautiful conversation weaving personal and sort of internal and external views on creativity. And I think as we begin to look towards the close, thinking now that we've had that, how we can really dig deep and share, in this era of rapid change, how can we ensure that creativity, that so human aspect, remains at the center or the heart of the human endeavor? And you take it in any way you'd like, Michael and Diana, maybe starting with you, Michael. But how do we ensure, with so much change in the world, technological and otherwise, that creativity remains at the heart of the human endeavor?
I think one of the key things is to pay attention, um, and pay attention to your own creativity. Pay attention to what works for you. Find your path. And we could go through a lot of different aspects to it. I don't know whether I should spend any time to read about this, but the idea that that just paying attention, observing what works for you, and seeing your failures and everything else, seeing this also in organizations, I think is just extremely important. Because once you do that, then you see that you've done something in one situation that worked. It doesn't have to be creative in the arts or anything like that, but something that worked in a situation. And very often these kinds of things keep coming up again and again. Things that are problems for you. It's almost like the universe is saying, pay attention to this. You got to really do something about this. This little quirk that you have that's not really working well as you develop as a person. And so the thing is to pay attention to that, and then what worked in that situation, and just say when you get a new situation that's causing a lot of stress and everything else, think about, yeah, I've been in these kinds of situations before, or maybe this specific kind of situation. And what did I do in the past? What worked and didn't work? And so uh, just keeping at it in terms of developing yourself and developing what relates to the world. And I think this is true for organizations too. This idea of what's the organizational history, and when do we get into co-creation, and when is competition worthwhile, and when is and collaboration at a lower level and co-creativity. It's not, all those things work together, and just to experience it and love it and just be creative.
Thank you.
I'd love to launch off of that because just towards the end there, I was the word responsibility came up, and that I do think that creativity is progress, and creativity is open-mindedness, and it's acknowledging that to solve the problems that we're encountering in the world that present themselves differently year after year, that requires creativity, that requires us to think of things that haven't been thought of yet. And I think in many ways, it doesn't surprise me that a series like this would have been born from 2020 and COVID, because those of us who, as you mentioned, Tom, were kind of like going about our lives in a way that was relatively routine, that didn't require a lot of outside thought, all of a sudden things were shaken up to the point of having to be creative with how to be social, how to get our food without being able to go to the grocery store, how to spend time with our family and cultivate those relationships. And so it shook everybody up, but it was an opportunity in many ways to think about how, okay, we're going to have to continue to be creative to solve these problems going forward. And even our planet changing the way that it is, it's those leaders that are, and those creative thinkers that are going to be the reason that we continue to exist. And there's a degree of all of us needing to acknowledge that creativity in our day to day and being available to change something about the way that we live and come up with new ideas is progress. It's how we all continue to survive and thrive here.
Wow. Beautiful. I love that, picking up on the responsibility and creativity as progress. I think the human ingenuity and creativity is just such an important aspect, and I spend a lot of time at the intersection of human development and mental health and technology and advancement and AI, and I'm an optimist for AI. And I truly, the reason is because of the ability for us to combine human innovation and creativity in that regard. I'd like to just you both have inspired me throughout the talk today. And as I listen to what you're saying here too, we've talked about creativity as adults and as children. We've talked about sort of this idea of where as a civilization have we come from, and where are we going? And the way that I personally think about creativity, creative collaboration, is looking at the roles of an architect and an archaeologist. So this idea that, as the architect, you need to have sort of the designs and the scaffolds for innovation. And, one of my personal experiences was collaborating with many brilliant creatives with Cirque du Soleil. And at a certain level, a creative act becomes a dance of collaboration, as you've touched on. And so what I found is, when you're moving from a soloist, sort of like you said, Diana, and you're trying to collaborate with others, being both an architect and an archaeologist, discovering what is supposed to kind of come out and come forth, and not kind of broadcasting or forcing anything, but allowing it to emerge, has been something I found really inspiring. Tom, what about you? I'd love to hear you add your voice before we maybe ask for some closing thoughts. And if we're lucky, maybe Diana will grace us with a little bit more music before we close.
Yeah, I mean, I as I mentioned before, I've had, particularly in the last 20 years, I've had so many opportunities to be involved in the creative process. And I've been listening into a lot of what the two of you, Michael and Diana, have been bringing to this conversation. And several years ago, I was producing a video and a song, and I brought together three musicians, a traditional African guitarist and singer and writer, and joining him, I brought a rapper. And that she happened to be a physician by day working in a hospital, and a musician rapper by night, and a traditional jazz saxophonist. And I brought the three of them together to write a song about the plight of the cheetah. And I had a film crew that was capturing their creative processes. They arrived at the Cheetah Conservation Fund in Namibia. And we filmed the whole time, the three of them touring the land, learning about the cheetahs, and then going into a room. And they spent the next day and a half writing a song about the plight of the cheetah. And to watch the three of them, who had never met, to come together in a pretty tight time frame to learn about and write this extraordinary song about the cheetah. And then we took them to the nation's capital, to a recording studio where we recorded the song. but to watch that whole creative process unfold with three musicians, very different artistic styles, not knowing each other, coming together in service of something greater than them, greater than themselves. And that's, for me, it's a bit of a metaphor of where we are as a species, as humanity. We're faced with some of the largest challenges that humanity's ever been faced with, and how to come together to co-create our future is it's a huge challenge for us. But watching the three of them in their process was a beautiful experience. And so that was up for me as I was listening to the two of you talking about creativity and collaboration and inspiration and the pressure and all of those forces that are at work in the creative process. And so it was I was listening intently to you, but reliving that experience of watching these three extraordinary musicians perform their craft in a collaborative way.
Mm. Yeah.
And just knowing that that's, innately in all of us to be creators. And it's what we're being called to do. We have to, for the survival of the human species and for all sentient beings on the planet. And it's a wonderful invitation to all of us to celebrate our humanity and our innate ability to be creators. And I just love how, Michael, over the years we've known each other, and just seeing how you think about the creative process and what you bring to a conversation. And Diana, having you with us today and sharing your creative process and how you think about creativity, and would love to have you share some more music with us before we close out the program.
And I just wanted to, and before that, I just wanted to make sure, Michael, did you have any closing thoughts on anything that's come forth today? I echo everything Tom said. Incredible contributions from both of you, and would love to give you the chance to share a little bit more wisdom if you have anything you'd like to say.
Well, it's important, again, to just pay attention, and also to know that you don't have to be a musician, you don't have to be an artist or anything like that. This is your chance in this lifetime to realize yourself and to make a contribution. And I just can't say that enough. And it's just all of us, and also in collaboration, because as you're saying, Tom, the challenges are really enormous. And also just pay attention to what's being done. I mean, there's just amazing things that are being done in terms of the challenges. I focus on environmental action and the climate disaster, and it's pretty grim. But at the same time, there are people doing amazing things together, creative and collaborative, and really making changes. And so that's where my hope is, and I think hope is very important too. That's it.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you. As we're beginning to sort of see our last 5 minutes here, I'd love to send people away with that sense of hope and optimism. And I'd love to share a short poem just in advance as Diana plays some music and maybe changes her sound setting and gets in her creative process. And while you do whatever it is that you need there, Diana, I would just invite our listeners at home to take a couple of deep breaths with us and allow all of this wisdom to wash over you, because we've had some beautiful insights shared today. And one of my teachers, Ken, whose poem I'm going to share in a moment, loves to say that it's only wisdom if it fits for you. And so remember that while we've had some brilliant insights today, this is really an internal experience for many of us. And so I love what Michael's saying about pay attention. I love what Diana has been saying about figuring out how to deconstruct your own process. And shameless mention, Diana has been collaborating with me on an embodied creativity program. And it's really about trying to find out what it is for you and how do you get into that place. So just before Diana puts us into another world, I'd invite people to maybe take stock of how you're sitting and where you are in time and space. Maybe you've got a good connection with your seat or the floor. And if it's comfortable for you, maybe just sit back and let the words and this music wash over you. I'm going to share a short poem by Risio Institute's elder Ken Brewer, because a lot of what we spoke about today is about flow and source and enlightenment, whatever word you'd like to use. For me, it sounds a lot like love and how that's expressed. So this is a poem called Love. Love, a gift, not a trade. Express your love freely. No limits, no holding back. More is always possible. Expect nothing in return. Heart open, barriers down. Fear released, creativity explodes. Love, a gift, not a trade. Open to receive. No judgment, no comparison. Trust, there is always more. Open your heart, breathe. Experience your safety. Take in the gift. Let love feed you.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Michael. Beautiful, beautiful way to kick off this week on Technologies of Hope, focusing on creativity. What a wonderful time to be with you all today. Dan, thank you as always, and I'll invite our audience to join us in the after chat. immediately following the broadcast. And then we invite you all back again tomorrow for our day 2 in the series, Technologies of Hope, where we're going to focus on the promise of healthcare technology and the role that creativity plays and has played in developing healthcare technology. So thank you all. Wonderful to be with you, and look forward to being with you, Dan, tomorrow. Thanks,
Dan.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.